Welcome to Intuitive Defense. My name is Baker. In this video, I'll be talking about a current event that demonstrates the ignorance of certain politicians, groups, officials, and people as it pertains to firearm magazines. To be fair, some people who argue against firearm magazines do not really understand what they are arguing against because they do not have adequate knowledge on the subject. You don't know what you don't know. Hopefully this video will help with that. The source information used for this video is in the article section of our Intuitive Defense website. We have provided a link to this article in the description of this video, so please feel free to use those references for yourself. You can also visit our website at intuitivedefense.com. The topic for this current event video is not necessarily a new topic or event, but it is a current Second Amendment issue as there is ongoing litigation and disingenuous talking points being pushed. As I have previously mentioned, this video focuses on firearm magazines, more specifically, the ban and limitation of firearm magazines in some areas. If you've seen the other current event videos, you know that there's usually a point in time which I take a sip of my whiskey coffee when I'm talking about infringement of rights and government overreach. So please allow me that moment of deliciousness as I sip this. This tastes like freedom. That is delightful. As it stands, there are currently 13 states that have some type of firearm magazine ban, limitation, and/or restriction, 14 counting the District of Columbia. In no particular alphabetical order, well, I guess there would be a particular order. Anyway, those states are, no surprise, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. Before moving on, I know the majority of people watching this video are already familiar with what a firearm magazine is, along with ammunition, but for those who might be new to firearms or just have a very limited knowledge on this topic, or none at all, I feel that it is necessary we talk about what a magazine is, along with their purpose, function, and importance. This information is relevant to other information I will cover later in this same video. If you fall into that first category and want to skip ahead, we have the chapter timestamps for this video in the description. Side note, even if you do not like firearms, this is still good knowledge to have. That way you can factually debate rather than emotionally argue your position against firearms. Regardless of your opinion or position, I am all about fact-based knowledge. What you decide to do with that knowledge is on you. I will always defend the rights of the people, even if I do not necessarily agree with your opinion, and I will always agree with your right to have your own opinion. To me, a fact-based and logical opinion is better than an opinion based on feelings and emotions, especially when that opinion is associated to freedoms and rights. So what is a firearm magazine? It is an ammunition feeding device that looks like this. Some firearms use a detachable magazine that looks like this, and some firearms use a non-detachable internal magazine. In this video, we are focusing on detachable magazines. So anytime I say magazine, I am referencing a detachable magazine unless otherwise specified. This particular detachable magazine is for use with a semi-automatic Glock 17. Semi-automatic means only one projectile is fired with one press of the trigger. Automatic, or fully automatic, means multiple projectiles are fired with one press of the trigger. This will continue until the trigger is released, the ammunition is depleted, or there is a malfunction. Automatic firearms are illegal for citizens to purchase, own, or possess, unless certain paperwork is filled out and approved. Remember, automatic firearms are just too dangerous for you to own. Unless, of course, you pay the government money, then they become less dangerous for you to own. In order for this Glock pistol to fire a projectile or bullet, a cartridge must be loaded into the chamber of the pistol, which would look like this outside of the pistol. From there, the user would apply rearward pressure on the trigger until the weapon goes boom, due to the firing pin striking the primer located on the bottom or the back side of the cartridge or casing. Once that happens, the primer ignites the gunpowder contained within the casing. Since energy takes the path of least resistance, and because the cartridge is securely held in place within the chamber, the energy leak happens where the bullet and the casing meet, causing the projectile, bullet, to travel down and eventually leave the barrel. After the boom, the slide is forced to the rear of the pistol, causing a spent casing to be ejected from the pistol. So now that we have a better understanding of ammunition, let's talk about the loading process. First, this is what's known as a dummy round. It is an inert cartridge with a metal casing and a plastic projectile. There is no primer and no gunpowder. Therefore, this cannot fire a projectile. It is very useful for training and demonstration. I will be using this to safely show the following visual presentations. Before doing that though, let me remove all this live ammunition. Get out of here. What the hell is it doing here? All right, there's really only two ways for a cartridge to enter the chamber. Either by placing it inside the chamber by the operator, as such, which would have to be physically done each time the pistol cycles following the boom and the projectile leaving the barrel, or using an ammunition feeding device, also known as a magazine. This is a manufacturer-issued magazine from Glock for use with their pistol. It can hold up to 17 cartridges. The magazine is filled one cartridge at a time. The purpose of the magazine is to feed a new cartridge into the chamber each time the weapon cycles, which under normal operation is done with each press of the trigger. It would look something like this. Pew! 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 Pretty much identical to that. Assuming there is no blockage, stoppage, or other malfunctions, the operator can continue to fire the firearm by pressing the trigger until all ammunition within the magazine and chamber is expended, or until they decide to stop pressing the trigger. Most firearm manufacturers use proprietary magazine designs for their firearms. That being said, some firearm manufacturers will use a certain magazine from another firearm manufacturer for their firearm, or design a firearm that will use a very common magazine and/or magazine type. For instance, the Palmetto State Armory Dagger pistol, 9mm, uses a Glock-style 9mm magazine. Another example is the AR-15 style rifle platform. There are many firearm manufacturers for this weapon system. For the most part, they all use the same style magazine that will function and operate from manufacturer to manufacturer. There are also non-firearm manufacturing companies that specialize in firearm accessories that design and manufacture their own magazines that will work with specific firearm manufacturers and/or certain style firearms. For instance, Magpul Industries manufactures magazines that will work in a Glock or Glock-style firearm, along with magazines that will work in an AR-15 style firearm. Some firearm manufacturers will include a Magpul magazine or magazines with their firearm. Magazine capacity is typically dictated by cartridge caliber and firearm type. What that means is cartridge calibers come in all shapes and sizes. Therefore, magazine capacity will vary based on space. Normally, a firearm magazine designed to hold 9mm cartridges will have a larger cartridge capacity than a firearm magazine that is designed to hold 45 ACP cartridges, since the 45 ACP is a larger cartridge than a 9mm. If it is a double-stacked magazine, meaning each cartridge is offset from the previous one and the next one, the cartridge capacity will be greater than a single-stacked magazine, meaning each cartridge is placed directly on top of the previous one. Also, the firearm type can dictate magazine capacity. For instance, a handgun that is designed to be used primarily as a concealed carry handgun typically has a smaller frame for concealment purposes. Because of this, a smaller handgun magazine would be used. Since a smaller magazine is utilized, typically the cartridge capacity is less than a magazine for a larger frame handgun. An industry standard might influence magazine capacity as well, but it is not because of firearm limitations. For instance, the firearm industry standard for cartridge capacity with an AR-15 style firearm is a 30-round magazine, meaning it will hold 30 individual cartridges. There are magazines that can be used in an AR-15 style firearm that have a lower capacity than 30, and magazines that have a higher capacity than 30, but the industry standard is 30. The most common type of firearms manufactured and purchased right now are detachable magazine-fed firearms, meaning the firearm is designed and intended to be used with a detachable magazine. It can operate one cartridge at a time without a magazine, but it was intended to operate with a magazine. Not to mention, that would be very time-consuming and not the best option in a self-defense situation. The caveat to this is, some firearm manufacturers have what's known as a magazine safety. The firearm, more specifically the firing mechanism, will not operate without a magazine, thus converting the firearm into what some people might call a mean-looking paperweight if there is no magazine inside the firearm. Almost all firearm manufacturers include a magazine with a firearm. Sometimes they include one magazine, sometimes they include 5 magazines. Sometimes they include a proprietary magazine, sometimes they include a third-party manufactured magazine. Sometimes they include a magazine or magazines that have a cartridge capacity of 7, sometimes they have a cartridge capacity of 30. Just depends on the firearm and manufacturer. Understanding that a firearm magazine, in most cases, is a fundamental part of the firearm, let's move on to magazine bans. As mentioned earlier, there are 13 states that have a high capacity or large capacity magazine ban in place. The District of Columbia also has a high capacity magazine ban. The term high capacity is a made-up term used by anti-Second Amendment politicians and groups as a way to package their anti-gun bullshit into a more manageable and easier to sell box. They would get more pushback if they just said magazine ban than when they say high capacity magazine ban. They are counting on the fact that people who buy into their anti-Second Amendment bullshit do not know the difference between a regular capacity magazine and a high capacity magazine.
What the hell is even that?
They're also counting on the fact that those same people do not know much about firearms or self-defense situations to begin with. The anti-Second Amendment politicians and groups intentionally use other people's lack of firearm knowledge and understanding against them and anticipate that those same people will share factually inaccurate anti-Second Amendment talking points because they do not know any better. They also know there are willfully ignorant people who despise anything to do with the Second Amendment that will gladly share their propaganda without any consideration of facts. When you think about it, to the person that doesn't know much about firearms, a high-capacity magazine ban is an easy sell because in their mind, they think there's a difference between a high-capacity magazine and a standard capacity magazine. It is an easy assumption to make because they use the word high capacity, which would lead a reasonable person to assume if something is labeled high capacity, it is because it exceeds the standard capacity. Due to ammunition types and firearm types, along with other variables, there is no standard capacity magazine that applies to every firearm equally. Therefore, there is no standard capacity, so the term high capacity is irrelevant. This is the disingenuous verbiage and talking points I mentioned earlier that anti-Second Amendment politicians and groups intentionally use to deceive people, and why I felt it was important to discuss firearm magazines previously before getting into this information. If you do not understand firearm magazines, you will have a hard time processing this information and understand how deceptive those anti-Second Amendment politicians and groups are. If these anti-Second Amendment laws were truly about safety as they claim, then they would not have to use deception to justify the need to infringe on the freedoms and rights of people. So if it's not about safety, what is it about? I wonder. Moving on. Right now, you might be thinking to yourself, surely they wouldn't just create a term that is based on a lie. A high-capacity magazine probably holds significantly more cartridges than a magazine provided by the firearm manufacturer, and because of that, although there is no standard capacity magazine, they refer to this large capacity magazine as a high-capacity magazine. First, your name probably isn't Shirley. Second, you had to have seen this joke coming. Third, that would be a logical assumption and an easy one to make. Since it's a logical assumption and an easy one to make, it is understandable to see how some people could support the idea of a high-capacity magazine ban. So what is the magic number that creates a high-capacity magazine? Surely, and yes, I'm now talking to you, Shirley, it has to be more than 70, 80, 100, 150, or even 200 cartridges, right? Wrong. It's 10. The magic number is 10 cartridges, which is actually less than the capacity of most included magazines from the firearm manufacturer. So if we use the included magazine for a specific firearm that is provided by the firearm manufacturer and called it a standard capacity magazine as it pertains to this specific firearm, i.e. Glock pistol, then in this case, a high capacity magazine is capable of holding fewer cartridges than the standard capacity magazine provided by the firearm manufacturer. Well, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Exactly. It's not supposed to make sense. Almost all gun laws don't make sense. It's not about making sense or making sensible laws or even about safety. It's about control, which is why they used to call certain legislation gun control. Now that makes sense. Something else that would make sense is if you clicked on that little button that says subscribe. It helps us out and it helps you out by giving you something to do while I'm running my pie hole. Anyway, there are a few states with high-capacity magazine bans that allow more than 10 cartridges. Those are Colorado, Delaware, Illinois, and Vermont. The other 9 states, along with the District of Columbia, limit the allowable cartridges per magazine to 10 in all firearms. Hawaii is the exception out of these states. Although they still have a limit of 10 cartridges per magazine, their high-capacity magazine ban only applies to handguns. What is the idea behind high-capacity magazine bans? Well, on paper, the theory kind of makes sense if you do not understand criminals, crime, and self-defense situations. The intention is to create a law that will limit the number of cartridges a magazine can lawfully hold and/or limit the number of cartridges that the user of the firearm can lawfully place inside the magazine. By doing this, it will cause the user of the firearm to only be able to fire the legal amount of ammunition contained within the magazine before having to reload the firearm with another magazine, which obviously is filled with the legal amount of ammunition. In a situation where multiple people might be randomly shot, the high-capacity magazine law will prevent the individual doing the shooting from having more than the legal amount of ammunition contained within the magazine. I guess it's a fail-safe style law. They figure since the shooter completely disregarded the law preventing them from randomly shooting people, this other law will prevent them from shooting more people. Yeah, right. In all reality, these are do-nothing laws masquerading as doing something laws. What I mean by that is, the politicians that create and pass these laws tell you that these laws will reduce crime without the laws really reducing crime because criminals disregard them. The only people these laws effectively target are law-abiding citizens, not lawless criminals. Law-abiding citizens do not want to break the law, and therefore, they comply with it. In some states, with magazine restrictions and/or high-capacity magazine bans, the state does not grandfather already existing and owned magazines into their new ban, which then forces citizens to surrender or destroy their once legal property without any compensation, because if they continue to possess those magazines, which are now classified as high-capacity magazines, they are breaking the law. So, if these laws are going to specifically target and negatively impact thousands or millions of law-abiding citizens, why do the politicians create these laws? Because it's easy and they are lazy.
4 years of work down the drain and I have a penis on my head.
Also, the majority of these politicians are not subject matter experts on firearms, so they really have no idea what they're talking about.
This right here has ability with a 30 caliber clip to disperse with 30 bullets within half a second. 30 magazine clip in half a second.
They can brag to their constituents that they have done something to help protect people, even though they have done nothing and their new law negatively impacts more people than it protects. Let's take a look at a video and see how criminals are complying with these laws. This video is from Oakland, California, and according to information on the Bay Area State of Mind Twitter page, it is a gang of robbers who targeted a cannabis dispensary. In this video, you can see one of the shooters armed with a handgun who shoots approximately 12 to 16 rounds. In 2016, California passed Proposition 63, which among other things imposed a ban on what they call high-capacity magazines and limited magazine capacity to a maximum of 10 cartridges. Some exceptions do apply based on caliber and firearm type. As you can see in the video, there is a criminal who was indiscriminately firing a gun with a magazine that clearly holds more than the allowable amount of ammunition. At no point did he do a reload. Therefore, he fired all those shots from the same magazine. I wonder if that upstanding citizen knows there's a law against having a magazine with a capacity of more than 10 cartridges. I also wonder if he knew that there was in fact a law on the books that prevents him from doing that, if that law would have influenced his decisions beforehand on using a high-capacity magazine while shooting at people. Because, you know, criminals don't want to break more laws when they're breaking laws and stuff. Good job, California. All you've done with this law is successfully deprive people of their property and ability to, without limitations, exercise their Second Amendment right. Let's jump over to Oregon. Well, from California, I guess it'd be up, but from where I'm at, it'd be over. But for you, it might be down. Yeah, whatever. Anyways, Oregon Ballot Measure 114. This was a piece of legislation that introduced, among other things, a ban on the manufacture, purchase, or sale of magazines capable of holding more than 10 cartridges. This was recently challenged in federal court, and unfortunately, upheld as constitutional in July of 2023. According to federal Judge Ermagert, large capacity magazines are not commonly used for self-defense and are therefore not protected by the Second Amendment. Because of this, the state of Oregon can set cartridge capacity limits on firearm magazines. My question is, are magazines commonly used for self-defense? Yes, because most common use firearms that are currently manufactured, sold, and possessed require the use of detachable magazines. Next question. Because of this, are magazines then protected by the Second Amendment? Yes, because they are a fundamental part of that firearm. My conclusion? The judge was wrong on this ruling, and I believe it will be challenged. I know sometimes judges do not want to be the first to do something, especially when their ruling can go against the government or set a precedent. So sometimes it's easier for them to just side with the government and let another judge deal with it if the ruling is appealed. In my opinion, the judge here either capitulated and sided with the government, or the judge does not fully understand firearms, their operation and function, along with self-defense situations. I think the second option is the most realistic one, as the judge included the term high-capacity magazines when relating to self-defense situations. As I have talked about, the term high-capacity magazine is a generic term and does not apply to all firearm magazines equally. Therefore, it cannot be applied to all firearms, firearm magazines, and self-defense situations equally. You must break it down even further to the basics. Either the Second Amendment protects firearm magazines, or it doesn't. The capacity of the magazine is irrelevant. The judge failed to do that. All of that was said to say this: the politicians that put forth anti-Second Amendment legislation and the judges that rule in favor of it say or think they are protecting people, but in all reality they are putting people in an even worse situation when they are faced with a life or death situation and the only protection they have is themselves. Getting the exact number of defensive gun use or self-defense situations when a gun is used and or present for protection is difficult because a situation might not always be reported to law enforcement, or it might not be tracked if it is reported. Typically, if a gun is fired in a self-defense situation, it is reported. If a gun is just presented or shown in a self-defense situation, it might not be reported. Depending on what statistics you look at, research you study, or articles you read, self-defense situations involving a firearm can happen anywhere between 70,000 to 1.5 million times a year. I know that is a large gap, but in my opinion, I believe defensive gun use situations are on the higher end of that range. Most politicians and media outlets are quick to talk about how bad guns are and how we need more gun laws because the hundreds of already existing gun laws are not working, but a new one will solve the problem. Sure it will. Although there are evil people out there that do horrible things using guns, there are even more people out there that rely on a firearm for self-defense. Those are the people that are intentionally left out by most politicians and media because they do not want people to understand there's a legitimate use for firearms. These are also the same people that gun laws specifically target and negatively affect. Since the government cannot 100% guarantee your safety 100% of the time, self-defense is a personal responsibility. The most effective means of self-defense is a firearm. Seeing as how certain firearms require the use of a detachable magazine in order to operate and properly function, when an individual who decides to exercise their Second Amendment right chooses a magazine-fed firearm as their means of effective protection, firearm magazines then become a necessary and fundamental part of that firearm. Since millions of individuals own magazine-fed firearms, magazines therefore become commonly used for self-defense and protected by the Second Amendment. Also, since there is no definitive answer on how many bullets are always necessary to always stop a threat and or threats in every self-defense situation, the government cannot dictate the reasonable, appropriate, and or minimum maximum amount of bullets needed for a self-defense situation. Therefore, the government should not enforce magazine capacity limitations. Because of this, any and all firearm magazine bans and or limitations are a direct infringement on the Second Amendment right of citizens. I wish the government and its representatives worked as hard to protect the freedoms and rights of people as they do to limit them. Those are my observations and opinions. I believe the government intentionally infringes on the freedoms and rights of people, and although they say the justification is safety, their motivation is for other reasons. Don't fall victim to their deception or subtly go along with their verbiage. If you give them an inch, they will take a mile. Also, take into consideration that a lot of politicians are either ignorant or willfully ignorant on a lot of topics. So be cautious on what they're saying, because they are probably an idiot.
My fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize.
What do you think? Will these high-capacity magazine bans benefit society? Do you think magazines are protected by the Second Amendment? Do you support magazine bans? Or do you think the government should pound sand when it comes to legislation like this? Let us know in the comment section of this video what your opinion is. Lastly, we're working on building the Intuitive Defense channel and have lots of ideas for upcoming videos, along with continued videos for our noob series. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel for future content. Some of our videos might be more entertaining than playing checkers with yourself. To the politicians and groups pushing magazine bans, worry about your own shit before you worry about my shit.